A terrifying warning from the CIA director about our fight against ISIS. You'll hear from him in just seconds, but first, remember when President Obama said this on Tuesday?
Our coalition continues to be on offense. ISIL is on defense, and it's now been a full year since ISIL has been able to mount a major successful offensive operation in either Syria or Iraq.
But then today, his CIA Director John Brennan, who works for him, disagreed and sounded this alarm.
Unfortunately, despite all our progress against ISIL on the battlefield and in the financial realm, our efforts have not reduced the group's terrorism capability and global reach. Moreover, the group's foreign branches and global networks can help preserve its capacity for terrorism regardless of events in Iraq and Syria. In fact, as the pressure mounts on ISIL, we judge that it will intensify its global terror campaign to maintain its dominance of the global terrorism agenda.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham goes on the record. Nice to see you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator John McCain said earlier today that President Obama is directly responsible for Orlando attack, but then he clarified it a little bit later in a tweet saying, to clarify, I was referring to President Obama's national security decisions that have led to the rise of ISIL, not to the president himself.
Right.
Where are you on this?
Well, John's right about that. There would be no ISIL without Obama's decision to leave Iraq. To our soldiers who fought in Iraq, you did your job. The surge did work. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is the predecessor to ISIL, was on their knees. The military advised President Obama to leave 10,000 troops in Iraq and we can stabilize it. He pulled them all out. 4 years ago, his national security team said, help the Free Syrian Army when Assad was on the ropes. If you don't, the terrorists will fill in the vacuum. So the decision to abandon Iraq, not help the Free Syrian Army 3 or 4 years ago, gave ISIL a foothold in Syria and Iraq, and the rest is history. So Barack Obama is to blame for the rise of ISIL. He has dismantled the ability to defend this country. We no longer interrogate terrorist suspects. We read them their rights and put them in federal court. We're going to have less FBI agents in 2017 than we did in 2013. In that regard, I blame President Obama.
The way that I look at this, going back, a number of years, I look at this like cancer in the body. If you get the first little tumor before it metastasizes to the brain, to the lung, and everything else, in the last several years, ISIS is not just on the battlefield. We've had James Foley, of course, an American beheaded, but we've had Charlie Hebdo, we've had Paris last November 13, we've had Belgium, we've had San Bernardino, we've had now Orlando. Everything all at least inspired by ISIS, if not directly.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
Libya. See, this president undersells the threats. He tries to, he says, there's no evidence this man was directed by ISIL. ISIL is still strong in the minds of twisted people like this. They still follow al-Baghdadi's call to attack in place. So without a caliphate, without al-Baghdadi having land and control, he would not be a winner in the eyes of this crazy guy in Orlando. So it was a directed attack in the sense that people like this man believe ISIL, they're winners.
What Secretary Clinton said earlier this week in her speech, she said that we need to destroy ISIS, which I agree, instead of contain. I saw that as a reference to the president's foreign policy.
It is a rebuke of his foreign policy. His goal is to destroy ISIL. Here's the one thing I can promise you. When his term is over, ISIL will still be in Iraq and Libya. His goal...
Well, according to the CIA Director Brennan, it's going to be even worse than that by then. That's no, you're talking January.
This is why I'm glad you had me on. For 3 years, I've been saying there's another 9/11 coming. Why do I say that? Because the caliphate allows ISIL to organize, recruit, plan, and send people out to attack. Here's what's happening. ISIL has gone from a large terrorist army. They're becoming a large terrorist organization. They hold territory in Iraq and Syria. As the caliphate collapses, these 40 to 50,000 ISIL fighters are not going to be killed because Obama's not trying to kill them. The slow beat lead strategy is going to allow them to go back to the Western Europe and eventually come here. What Brennan is saying is that the threat from ISIL is growing because these fighters, as they leave Iraq and Syria, they're coming here and other places.
All right, well, okay, the one in Florida was an inspired one.
Yes, homegrown.
And that's because he saw it on the internet. Look, I'm look, I've fought for the First Amendment in the courtroom. I'm an old-fashioned trial lawyer that actually has fought for the First Amendment. But there seems to be no concerted effort, leadership from the top, and I say the president's a commander-in-chief, to try to bring these Twitter accounts, Facebook, bring them into the White House and talk. How far are we going to go? Because if you take the terrorism incident in Tel Aviv last week, is that no sooner had 2 people murdered 4 people that the former prime minister of Hamas got on the Twitter and called them heroes. So, of course, everybody sees that. I mean, all the sort of praising, all the sort of solicitation and inspiration is that, is it not time that we start thinking about shutting down their communication?
We should fight them everywhere in cyberspace, on the ground. And
why aren't we?
Well, because you got a president who really is not on offense. He is trying to pass this problem on to the next president. He doesn't want to escalate the war. We have now over 5,000 troops in Iraq. Remember when I was running for president, briefly, I said, if you don't realize we need American boots on the ground in Iraq and Syria to help prosecute the fight against ISIL, you're not ready to be commander-in-chief. Everybody said, oh, no, we don't want another war in Iraq. Well, we got almost 6,000 troops in Iraq. I said 8,000 to 10,000. We don't have really anybody to work with in Syria.
He may not want to escalate the war, but if you listen to his CIA director, the war has escalated. The war has escalated.
The interview should be that you got a president who doesn't want to escalate the war. The enemy is getting stronger and we're getting weaker. And Brennan is saying, in spite of what you hear from the president, I'm being overloaded in terms of trying to protect the nation from ISIL fighters. No matter what the president's telling you about Iraq and Syria, there are more of these guys than I can handle. There are going to be less FBI agents in 2017 than there were in 2013. We're destroying our defense budget. What Brennan is telling you that the president is not being honest with you about the nature of the threat. We're actually being overwhelmed. We're not winning.
You say he's not being honest. Is he lying?
I think he's delusional about the status of ISIL, and I think he intentionally underestimates the threat because he's trying to show that his policies are working when they're not. He has this model of trying to lead from behind. It is collapsing. There are going to be more attacks in America because when we capture somebody under President Obama, we read them their rights rather than gathering intelligence.
Well, when you talk about the metastasis of ISIS, it's not just in San Bernardino. It's not just in Florida. Well, it's also in the Philippines the other day. A Canadian was beheaded by a group that's inspired by us, has pled allegiance to ISIS. So it has spread literally around the globe. I mean, it's everywhere.
It is like cancer. I've been saying this for 3 years. President Obama's policies to destroy ISIL are not working. They're not meant to destroy ISIL. Are they failing? They're failing miserably, and Orlando is a symptom of their failure. If al-Baghdadi was dead, nobody would be following his call to attack. If we took their land away, they would go away, but what we're doing is slowly trying to bleed them.
I think it's too late. I think they're all over, and they're inspired.
They're all over. They're in our backyard. They're all over Europe. They're all over Africa. They're in Libya. And Brennan is trying to tell the American people, no matter what your president's saying, as the intelligence leader of this country, we're under more threat, not less.
Would we be safer under President Trump or President Clinton?
I don't see how it could be anything but better, except here's the problem.
Which one out of the two?
Well, let me tell you Trump's problem. If you understood the war, you wouldn't declare war on all Muslims. We need Muslims to help us win this war. When you declare war on the Muslim faith, then you're playing into ISIL's hands. And when Clinton calls for gun control after Orlando, if gun control could protect the country, there'd be no Paris. The French had the strongest gun laws in the world. So the first thing out of Clinton's mouth was gun control. The first thing out of Trump's mouth is ban all Muslims. This guy was born in Queens, New York. What I would do is I'd rebuild the FBI. I'd give them more money. I'd put the CIA, turn them loose. I'd rebuild the military. I'd get partners in the regions. I'd kill every one of these bastards I could find.
You know what I would do? I would call up Cameron, Putin, Olan, Netanyahu, and anybody, and any of the other world leaders, and I'd meet them all in one spot and get everybody joined together against this, because I don't think we can do this alone.
This is a war against the world, not just Islam itself.
Anyway, Senator, nice to see you.
Thank you.